Hi, everybody. This is Galactic Club, and this is our first episode of Weather Warfare in the 21st Century with Rick Duate. And Rick has many, many groups on Facebook with thousands and thousands of followers, and one of them is called Weather Wars International. And so today we'll be talking about geoengineering with DEWs, directed energy weapons, HAARP, chemtrails, and much more. And Rick has a lot to say on this subject, and he says that Mother Nature is no longer in control, and man now has the technology and capability of making things 100 times worse. And he will go into a lot of detail, and we're going to have a bit of fun over the next 45 minutes or so. And, take it away, Rick, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, that was a nice introduction. Thank you very much, Henry. And Kelsey in the background, thank you.
Thank you.
Obviously, I'm happy to be here tonight. Let me give you a little background. To talk about weather wars in the 21st century, there's quite a bit to talk about. So this is part one of what I hope to be is 3 parts. The first part, which is going to be tonight, I'll be addressing, excessive rain or floods. The episode, let me check my show notes here. The second part, or episode 2, will deal with earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, and tsunamis. And part 3, which will be the one I'm sure we'll get a heck of a lot of interest in, is directed energy weapon fires and attacks. So tonight we'll just concentrate on excessive rain and flooding. Now, I'm sure there's not a person on this planet who has not experienced, especially in recent years, I'd say probably in the past 15, 20 years, excessive amounts of rain. Most of which, if they haven't realized it in their own neighborhood, they've probably seen it on the evening news, where towns get flooded out, washed away, people die. It's just like abnormal. And the mainstream media, specifically talking about the news that you turn on your TV, or the newspapers, magazines, radio, will tell you this is all due to climate change. Well, that's a lot of bunk right there in itself, because if you live on planet Earth, climate change is taking place every day. So, they say, well, our civilization, or the people are responsible for the CO2 emissions. Well, yeah, okay, but, there's enough trees. They can handle all those CO2 emissions, so that's a lot of bunk there in itself. But I'm not going to delve into that too much right now. That'll be, for future episodes. But to get into the 21st century of weather wars, it's necessary to set a little foundation, or give you guys a little background on this. And I think you can relate to this, is that, literally for thousands of years, man has been on this earth. And in one way or another, he's always tried to influence, if you will, the gods, to bring them rain so they can grow their crops, so they don't starve to death. You talk about your shamans, your witch doctors, even American Indians. And I'm a third-generation American Indian, basically a half-breed. But my grandmother was Mohawk Indian. And, we talked about those times. And, the elders of the tribes, and we're talking about a lot of tribes here in the United States, used to do rain dances, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen, on TV, or one way or the other, been told stories about it. But it's true. And in other societies, like down in Mexico dealing with Aztecs, they even went as far as doing human sacrifices in order to appease the gods to make it rain. So, that sets the foundation. So, man has always been trying to influence the weather one way or the other for literally thousands of years. Now, let's take this up to the last century, the 20th century. It was during the 1900s. Now, during the 1900s, after the birth of what you would call the industrialization in the United States, where we had machinery doing things for us, like making cars and that sort of thing, man was now capable of working out some of the technology back then, where they were able to influence the weather. For instance, shooting rockets up in the air and exploding, let's say, silver iodide in order to make it rain from passing cloud. Every so often, yeah, it would work as far as that goes. Now, I want to interject something here that, like I said, there's a little background that goes into this. I'm going to plug a good friend of mine. His name is Dominic Mamera. Now, Dominic is out of Canada, and he has got a website which is called weathermodificationhistory.com, and literally he has documented over 100 years worth of articles here in the United States and Canada and worldwide, which show man has been actively involved for over 100 years in not only influencing the weather, but manipulating the weather. So there's not a lot, there's not a lack of information or background on this. This has been going on a long time, but it's basically been keeping itself buried from the American public in one form or another. Give you, for instance, right now, I'm almost 67 years old, so I had the good fortune of growing up, during the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and so on and so forth. But when I was younger, I knew what weather was like before, man started manipulating things. So I used to see real blue skies and real cumulus clouds. There were no chemtrails out there. I saw the behavior of hurricanes. I paid attention to those things because, the outdoor life was part of my life. I was an athlete. I played most of my, sports like baseball, football, and ran track. So weather was very important for me to pay attention to. And, of course, I got into lawn and landscaping, owning my own businesses. And, of course, that became extremely important as well, too. But a lot of people don't realize, especially the younger generation, don't realize the transition that has taken place, let's say, in the past 50 or 60 years. What they're used to is what they've seen in their particular lifetime. Now, back in 7th grade, which is in the early 60s, how old am I? 12, 13 years, old at that time. In science class, I remember them talking about making it rain by seeding the clouds. Well, it was talked about then. Today's science books or science classes don't even mention it as far as that goes. So that gives you a little background there. Like I said, if you want to know more about the past 100 years of weather manipulation, check out Dominic's website. It's, like I said, it's weathermodificationhistory.com. Now, there's aside from plugging Dominic, there's a few people that I'd like to thank for bringing me along over the past 6-7 years that I've been involved in this machination of weather warfare. One of them is Alana Freeland, good friend of mine. Alana Freeland has written several books. The one I want to bring up is the one she published in 2014, which is Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. Very beneficial. If you want to buy the book, it's in paperback form. I think it runs about $20 or so. You might be able to get a little bit cheaper. But I highly recommend that book for everybody. That'll fill in some of the gaps in your understanding of what I'm talking about here tonight, and we'll talk about in the future. Another is Billy Hayes. Billy Hayes is a longtime friend of mine and Alana Freeland. Billy Hayes was electrical engineer, and he set up probably hundreds of different HAARP facilities across the planet. So he's an expert in that particular area. So he gives a little insight in that particular area. I'm not going to go into HAARP right now, but that's it. Another is Jamie Lee. J-M-E is how he writes his first name, Jamie Lee. He has a website called plaintruth.com. Plain is spelled like an airplane as opposed to plain being like a plain piece of paper. Plaintruth.com. He has documented quite a bit of information regarding weather warfare, especially with regards to directed energy weapons, especially the fires that have taken place out in California, because he lives in Sonoma County, California, where a lot of these devastating fires have taken place. For instance, the latest one here in Paradise, California. There is, excuse me, one other person I'd like to thank is Dr. Judy Wood. Now, this will figure into our third episode, which will be dealing with directed energy weapons. But Dr. Judy Wood, several years ago, she wrote a book. Now, if you can't buy the book, which is understandable, I think it runs you about $50 or $60. I have a copy of that. She has several videos online. You can check out those videos, and she basically surmises what she's covered into the book. So it would be a little bit easier for you, and obviously a lot more affordable. But if you wanted to go into the details, she's a good forensic investigator. My hat's off to her. But the book that I'm referencing that she wrote a few years back was called Where Did the Towers Go? Now, we're talking about on 9/11. And it has it's Where Did the Towers Go? Evidence of directed free energy technology on 9/11. So all these things come into play, and that gives you a little background as far as that goes. Now, moving a little bit forward, and I'm still dealing with the background, then I'm going to bring you up here in a few minutes to the 21st century. But during the 20th century, technology improved to the point where now, specifically the U.S. military primarily had the technology where they were able to influence the weather in ways that Mother Nature could never imagine. And I'll start with, for instance, excuse me, in 1947, there was a hurricane off the east coast of the United States. It was known as Hurricane King, and that was 1947. The hurricane, if you wanted to reference it, is also known as the Cape Sable hurricane. Now, what happened there is the Hurricane King was approaching the southeastern portion of the United States around Florida, South Carolina, Georgia area, and the United States government, and I'll use United States government in quotes, more likely NASA was involved in that or the U.S. military. They decided, well, we don't want this hurricane doing any damage, to these particular areas. So they decided to send up a couple planes and drop 100 pounds of dry ice over the top of the hurricane. Well, they didn't know what the hell they were doing, and what ended up happening was the hurricane went into a bit of a frenzy, actually like a seizure. And what happened was it actually turned inland and did more damage than they expected. And the South Carolina government ended up suing the federal government for the damage that it did. And in U.S. dollars, I think it was close to $3 million worth of damage. Now, today, I think that amount of money probably would probably be attributed to perhaps maybe $100 million worth of damage. But nonetheless, That may not seem like a lot, but back then that was a lot of money. And so subsequently, since they were sued, the U.S. government and the military, they sort of backed off and said, we better get our act together here and figure this thing out before we do this thing again. Now, in 1952, I'm gonna take you across the pond, as they say. I'm going to take you to England, as it was known back then. It's now known as the United Kingdom. Now, excuse me one second. In 1952, the Royal Air Force was spraying off the western coast of England. They were spraying the skies much like what they do today with chemtrails. They were actually seeding the clouds. They were doing their experiment to see what would happen. But just like with the folks in Hurricane King, they really didn't realize the ramifications of what they were doing. And what ended up happening, and you can find articles and videos on this. It's called The Day They Made It Rain. And it was the Lynmouth, Lynmouth, England flood disaster. And you can also reference that under Operation Cumulus, like the cumulus clouds. And what had happened is that town literally was destroyed, nearly wiped off the face of the earth because the amount of rain created mudslides and floods, and literally destroyed homes, businesses, shops, hotels, and bridges. I mean, if you could take a look at the pictures back then, and they're all in black and white, you get the magnitude of what actually happened. It was catastrophic. It was biblical. And many people don't realize that. You know, now they're basically testing the water with their technology at this point. Now let's advance a few years and go into, say, 1966 to 1972. A lot of people probably recall the Vietnam War. Well, what does this have to do with weather warfare? Well, what it has to do with is this is the first time. How do I want to put this? This is the first time where war was waged against a nation, not only by conventional means with bombs and bullets, but also by using the weather. Now, this is called Operation Popeye, just like the cartoon character Popeye. It was called Operation Popeye. And what they did there for about 7 or 8 years is they actually sprayed the skies over North Vietnam. Now, what had happened is obviously when they sprayed the skies, it rained and it rained and rained. The whole idea was to prevent North Vietnam from resupplying itself as it was in battle with South Vietnam. It was quite successful. They were able to extend the monsoon season, which is the heavy rainy season, by an additional 30 days. Now, it did hamper the North Vietnamese, but the North Vietnamese are very resourceful people, and they managed to get through it. But nonetheless, that's when really weather warfare began, and that was in the 20th century. Now, I had mentioned earlier about a gentleman I'm good friends with, by Billy Hayes, known as the HAARP Man. And in a conversation I had with him a couple years ago, we were talking about hurricanes specifically and how it relates to HAARP. And I asked him, I said, okay, I've got all this background with regards to HAARP and hurricanes. I said, when did the government or the U.S. military first have its what we call significant success in controlling a hurricane? And he said, Rick, it was 1989 with Hurricane Hugo. And I said, really? He said, yeah. Now, let me define something for you. when I say HAARP, for those who are not familiar with HAARP, HAARP is an acronym which stands for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Obviously, the government and the military, they like their acronyms, you know. And there is only one official HAARP, which is up in Gakona, Alaska. And what this facility did, it was made up of an array of 180 different electrical antennas. And when turned on, these antennas would generate literally millions, if not billions of watts of electricity, which they could focus up into the upper atmosphere, raise the ionosphere, and I'll get into all that technical stuff when we get into part 3 dealing with directed energy weapons, lift the ionosphere and influence the weather patterns, specifically the jet streams and the atmospheric rivers. So with that success with Hurricane Hugo in 1989, which really devastated South Carolina, you can pretty much bet that every hurricane thereafter was influenced one way or the other by the U.S. military. And I'm even talking about, probably one of the most destructive hurricanes to ever hit the United States was Hurricane Andrew, and I believe that was in 1992. Excuse me. Okay, so that gives you a little background as far as the 20th century. Now we're going to delve into the 21st century. Now, in the 21st century, as you can imagine, technology improves. People figure out ways to do something a little bit better, make a better mousetrap. But to set the stage for weather warfare in the 21st century, how does one literally make it rain and cause flooding? Well, that would be a good question, okay? Now, the answer to that is, first of all, you have to know where the sources of water come from. Not in any particular order or importance, but there's 3 basic areas where water comes from. Obviously, it comes from evaporation in the form of clouds. Specifically, you take a look of another pair would be, let's say, what they refer to as atmospheric rivers. Now, clouds usually reside in about the 7,000 foot range. Atmospheric rivers run in about the 10 to 20,000 foot range. Now, these atmospheric rivers traverse west to east across the planet. Anywhere from 3 to 5 of these atmospheric rivers at any one given time, from the top of the earth at the north and to the bottom of the earth in the south. Now, these rivers are constantly moving. Okay, so now, in order to convey, I guess the best analogy to explain what an atmospheric river is, if you can imagine one of these atmospheric rivers wrapped around the planet like a ribbon, that carries more rain than the entire Amazon River. And so if you've got 5 of those traversing over the planet, you can imagine how much water is up there, okay? And, of course, keep in mind, like 2/3 of this planet is covered by water, so I think there's going to be water here for quite some time. But there's quite a bit of water up in the atmosphere as well, too. So that's number 1, atmospheric rivers. The second is power plants are a source of water vapor and moisture as well, too. Now, when I speak about power plants, what am I talking about? Well, these power plants are the ones that generate electricity. Now, they can be electrical based or they can be nuclear based. Now, here in the United States, there's some 7,000 power plants that emit water vapor during the course of the day. And you can usually see these. If you're anywhere near one of them, you can see this water vapor or clouds coming out of these giant smokestacks. Most people have seen them. If they haven't seen them live, then they've probably seen them in pictures or on the news as far as that goes. But literally each one of these 7,000 in the United States emit literally millions and millions of gallons of water vapor into the air every single day. Now, if you take those 7,000 and sort of put them together, and you know what to do with it technologically speaking, then you can make it rain anywhere on the, in the United States at any given time. I'll get into more of that here in a few minutes. But with 7,000 of these power plants in the United States, there's over 63,000 worldwide as well, too. So the phenomena of tapping into the infrastructure of the power plants is not only exclusive to the United States, it also includes other countries as well, too. That's why you see floods not only in the United States, but over in Europe. You'll see it in Australia. You'll see it in New Zealand. You'll see it in remote parts of even Africa, as an example, or the arid deserts of Saudi Arabia. Same sort of thing. Now, the third one has to do with NASA, the National Aeronautics Space Administration. Now, that's another source of water as well, too. And a lot of people say, how in the hell can NASA be responsible for making water? Well, this is going to blow some minds. They've actually created a machine that actually creates cumulus clouds. Now, if you go online and look up the video, I think it's called, what is it called? NASA's playing God with the weather. I'm pretty sure that's what the title is. NASA's playing God with the weather. In about a 2 or 3 minute video, they'll show you where this machine actually makes these humongous cumulus clouds, and an hour later it rains. So there's your third choice. Now, these cumulus cloud making machines or rain making machines developed by NASA, they're not only land based, they can also be ocean based, like on ships, which is quite prevalent. They use that quite a bit in the Gulf of Mexico during hurricane season. But it's quite interesting. So those are 3 main sources of the water that creates excessive rain or floods. Again, it's atmospheric rivers, power plants, and of course NASA. Now when you get into the technology of this, I'm really not what you want to call a techie, but conceptually, a person has to understand, well, that's all fine and well. These are sources of water. So how does man, technologically speaking, tap into these sources of water? Well, it's very simple. Here we are in the 21st century. Man has developed computers. He's developed equipment to be able to influence the weather. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, or alluded to a little bit earlier, one has to do with HAARP. Now, that comes into the category of what's called ionospheric heaters. Ionosphere means these electrical generating arrays that are across the planet actually heat up the ionosphere, which is the upper part of our atmosphere just before space. Now, when they heat that area up, it creates a bubble, if you will, which actually expands out into space. Well, the lower atmospheres beneath it have to rise to fill that vacuum. Now, when you influence the ionosphere, you've tapped into the area, everything below it, where you can actually control the jet streams as well as the atmospheric rivers. And they can do that. It's just like it's manipulation of the weather. So they can control the jet stream and the atmospheric rivers. Let's say they want to bring it down over to South Carolina. Well, that's what they do in a couple of days. You know, they've got catastrophic flooding. It's as simple as that. So I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep it light. I'm not going to get into technical aspects of things. If you want to, the best way for me to explain this is by inviting you to my webpage, my website, which is Weather Wars International. There, you'll find all this information out. I post on it daily, anywhere. Well, right now I've been blocked by Facebook for spreading too much truth. So I've been blocked for 30 days. I won't be back until December 26th. But if you go to the webpage, you'll see some of the events that have taken place across the world here recently. But more importantly, if you want to check some of the background on this, when you go to the webpage, at the top of the page, click on Photos. And after you click on Photos, then click on Albums. And I would say offhand, I probably have anywhere from 24 to 36 albums on there. And inside there, you'll find articles and documents that relate to weather warfare. You'll find videos that relate to that as well, too. And I think at last count, with including articles and videos, I think I have close to 1,000 entries right there in itself. That's a bare minimum. So there's not a lack of sourced information. You will definitely not be bored. So everything I'm telling you, it just doesn't come out of my head. I got better things to do. It's all documented, but I've got it in one spot where a person can access the information he seeks and become more knowledgeable about it. And to my knowledge, and I've been around, let's say, on Facebook and scouring different websites for a little over 7 years now, I haven't seen one website that has actually consolidated this information into one source that a person can, tap into. Well, yeah, I'm doing a little bragging, but, it's necessary. You got to find out what's going on in life if you're going to have influence or do something about it.
Yeah, so Rick is telling or explaining to everybody, a bit about how weather warfare started here on this planet in the last century or so, and there's he's explained it pretty well for people, and as he was saying at the end there, it makes sense to investigate and become aware of what is taking place so that you can make better choices instead of just going along with what everybody else is doing, which is agreeing to the demise of this planet that that is taking place from the world controllers. They are out there and they are doing the chemtrails, they are doing HAARP, they are doing all this weather modification, all this weather warfare, displacing people from their homes to get people into smart cities so they can be more subjected to Wi-Fi, 5G, 6G, and spend less time with the natural environment and really just destroy the natural environment, which really supports all of us here. Like Rick said, there's plenty of water here. We've been learning about primary water, which is basically an endless supply beneath the surface of the earth. Deborah Tavares talks about that. And, there's a whole lot taking place here, and we really appreciate having Rick on to share what he's been learning because, we've really just got to share what's taking place here so that more people can become aware of what's taking place so they can make better decisions and do something that makes sense and does support the natural environment, which supports all of us here, instead of going along with, like I said, the demise of this planet, which is really just taking place, more and more rapidly. Like Rick was saying, we used to have normal weather when he was growing up, and very quickly we've got directed energy weapons and HAARP and chemtrails, especially, in the 21st century. It's exponential. We're here in Huntington Beach, and every day we can see chemtrails and HAARP clouds, and we're subjected to the weather controllers, and we're living on this planet. It makes sense to become more aware of what's taking place and, like I said, make better decisions and create a new position, which is what we're doing as wonderful worldwide educators. You can click our link in the description of this video and learn more about what we're doing to, create a better position and something more wonderful than what everybody else is doing here. So, are you there, Rick?
I just came back. Thank you. It was excellent timing.
Cool.
Excellent timing. So I gave a little background. Like I said, I don't make anything up. Everything is documented, and you're welcome to do it. It's all free. And just to let you know, I've been doing this. I've been documenting this for about 4 years now, as far as weather warfare. And one of the things I checked out is to see how many events I've actually documented over the past 4 years with regards to flash floods, excessive rain, or flooding worldwide. And I found out I have over 3,000 entries. Now, it may seem like a lot, maybe it doesn't. It depends upon your viewpoint, but that's 3,000 different instances of flooding in different parts of this planet. Now, I want you to keep in mind there's probably a lot of these flash floods and flooding, both on a biblical and a catastrophic scale, that I've probably missed because the websites that I go to seek out this information perhaps didn't carry it. But I try to document as much as possible. Okay? So anyway, like 3,000 instances. So this is not an uncommon event. Flooding is the number one source for weather warfare in the 21st century across the planet. We've seen it here in the United States. We've seen it in England. We've seen it in Europe, the Mideast, Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, China, you name it. Every continent and virtually every country has experienced this type of event. Now, just to give you a highlight of some of these things, let me check my notes here. Oh, I know what I wanted to do. I just wanted to bring up a couple of things that most people might remember, because this made the evening news here, not only in the United States, but also worldwide as well, too. It's amazing the amount of news coverage that this event actually was covered by the mainstream media. Now, this is what was known as the Ellicott City flooding. Now, Ellicott City is a small historical town just outside of Baltimore, Maryland, which is, I used to live in Crofton, Maryland, which is a halfway point, 30-minute drive between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And I've been to Ellicott City, and where I was living in Crofton, Ellicott City was just a 20-minute drive. It was a beautiful town, absolutely beautiful. Talk about historic. I mean, some of these buildings are hundreds of years old. A lot of nice shops, artwork, places to eat, antiques, you name it. I mean, it's someplace you would want to go on the weekend, take a stroll, and just, visit. It's really beautiful. Well, in 2016, let me see the date on this. In 2016, it was on July 30th. They received 6 inches of rain in less than 90 minutes. Now, 6 inches of rain in 30 minutes is going to be just about wipe out anything. Well, it actually did. And this happened at nighttime when things got real dark. I think it was 2 or 3 people actually ended up getting killed, but it literally destroyed the town. And this is referred to as once in a 1,000-year flood event. Well, okay, I got that. that's understood. But to have that much rain concentrated in one particular area obviously raised my eyebrows. I knew the weather was being manipulated, but the majority of the population obviously did not know it was being manipulated. They just talked it off, okay, well, it's once in a 1,000-year event. Now, let's fast forward 2 years. On May 27th, 2018, 2 years later, what happens? Ellicott City is hit with their second once in a 1,000-year flood. This time it brought 8 inches of rain in just 2 hours. It was just as catastrophic. They were just about finished completing the reconstruction of Ellicott City. Now they got this massive 8-inch flooding event, and it wiped out the city again. Shop owners, they basically threw up their hands and they just, packed their bags and left town. Some decided, well, I'm going to rebuild again. That's all fine and well, but that's going to be a process of several years. So that's what these guys are doing. A lot of people say, well, why do they do this? That's a good question. I'm asked that, quite a few times. You have to understand that there's a lot of things that are involved in trying to explain this away, but you're dealing with people who behave badly. They're actually evil people, and people can't imagine more than 1 or 2 people actually being evil, but, there's actually, if you pay a person enough money, they'll become evil in a heartbeat. They'll do whatever it takes in order to get that paycheck so they can feed themselves and feed their family, keep a roof over their head, and they go to football games on Sunday. So that answers one of the whys. The other why comes into what's called Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. Now, and I'm not going to cover this in great detail, but this is the United Nations agenda, basically, of depopulating areas on planet Earth. Now, when we talk about depopulation, I'm not talking about just eliminating people off the face of the Earth. I'm talking about moving them away from areas and condensing the population into major cities. Now, you don't quite understand that. Like I said, I'm not going to. That's a subject all into itself. Geez. Deborah Tavares, you can find, she runs the website stopthecrime.net. You can go check out her videos. She explains it in a lot more detail than I could possibly do it, but Agenda 21 is behind that as well, too. Let's see. Also, another reference point is what's referred to here in the United States as the Georgia Guidestones. Now, these are monoliths of granite that are in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. There are 6 of them, and they're written in 6 different languages in granite. But one of the most startling aspects of these stones is that one of their goals is to reduce the world's population by 90%. Now, these guys mean business. They have no empathy for people. They just have an agenda. The agenda is basically we want a one-world government. We want to control everything. And who are these individuals? Well, we're talking about the very wealthy people here on the planet. We're talking about the Rockefellers. We're talking about the Donald Trumps. We're talking about the Rothschilds over in Europe and the Middle East, and a whole bunch of other extremely wealthy people that have climbed on board in this regards. Now, if you go back to the Georgia Guidestones and they say, well, we're going to wipe off 90% of the population of the planet, well, what's the population of the planet now? Well, we're talking about 7.2 billion people. Well, that means 6.5 people will be wiped off the face of the earth. People can't fathom that. I can't fathom that. I can, because I know what kind of evil lurks in these individuals. And they have the technology to do it. Now, projection is, if it goes that long, and they don't wipe out 90% of the population here in the next couple of years, by the year 2030, that 90% will become 8.2 billion. And if we go another 20 years, the population of the planet will be roughly around 9.6 billion. That means they'll get rid of 8.6 billion people. It's rather insidious. It is definitely nefarious, which means wickedly evil. But that's what we're dealing with. And a person, in order to really get a grasp on reality, and this is very difficult for people to do, but they have to really face evil. They have to understand there is a lot of evil on this planet. And until they're willing to confront that, they really can't confront anything. They can't understand what's going on. So, I'm not going to get into too much more. We've pretty much taken up about 45 minutes of our time. But I do want to mention one thing here in closing. And then, of course, we'll have a little question and answer session here afterwards. But LBJ, which is Lyndon Baines Johnson, he was the successor to RFK, Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy, as President of the United States. Now, in November of 1963, in a commencement speech, he made, and I want to quote this for you because this has everything to do with anything that is going on this planet today, especially with regards to the U.S. government and the military. Here's an exact quote. "He who controls the weather will control the world." Let that sink in for a minute. I'll repeat that. He who controls the weather will control the world. And guess what? That's exactly what's happening. They're controlling the world. They're controlling the weather.
It's really important for the kids and the children to learn about what's taking place on their planet so that they can possibly do something and dream bigger than what is here, because it's complete devastation, like you have mentioned, the Georgia Guidestone. So I just wanted to tell everyone about that, and that there is something that we can do, and that is become more aware. We can become more aware of what's taking place, and we can better handle what is taking place, just like Tesla with his technology, and vibrations is very important as well. So they're, just like they have figured out their weather manipulation, we can figure out things too, and we can do a lot better and make a lot more sense here. So I really appreciate everything you shared and your documentation all these years, and the Facebook groups you've created and letting people know. It's very important. Thank you for coming on our show and coming on again, and just thank you very much. And for everyone listening, you can go to our website. We're wonderfulworldeducators.com, and we're just here to show people how to become more aware, make better choices, and free yourself of all of these restrictions. And we'll see what happens next.